I'm truly fortunate now to introduce our banquet speaker for this evening, Angela Alaimo O'Donnell. Angela O'Donnell is a writer, poet, and professor at Fordham University, where she teaches English, creative writing, and American Catholic Studies. She also serves as Associate Director of the Cushwa Center for American Catholic Studies. Angela holds a master's and PhD in English language and literature from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She studies American Catholic writers with special emphasis on Flannery O'Connor, contemporary poetry and literature, women's poetry, and religion and literature. She is founding editor of the series Studies in the Catholic Imagination, the Flannery O'Connor Trust Series, published in partnership with Fordham University Press. Her recent publications include Holy Land in 2022 and Radical Ambivalence, Race in Flannery O'Connor, published in 2020. Angela's work has received awards from the Catholic Press Association and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, the Christianity and Literature Book of the Year Award, and the Arlen G. Meyer Prize in Imaginative Writing. She has published approximately 300 poems in a variety of journals, and she's also a former columnist and current contributing writer at America Magazine. Angela, thank you for joining us this week, and the title of her address this evening is "The Holy Land is Everywhere, the Poetry of Witness and the Ignatian Imagination." Please join me in welcoming Angela O'Donnell.
Thank you, Darren, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you all for being here this evening. I get to back cleanup, I guess, right? So I hope it keeps us all awake. So I am delighted to be here with you all to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Cushwa Center. As you may know, the Centers for Catholic Studies, they're currently thriving in American universities, including Fordham's Curran Center, which I have helped to run for the last 20 years, would not exist if it were not for the Cushwa Center. In fact, John Curran, who is our benefactor, said, "I want you guys to make a center like Cushwa." So we have done our best, but it's not quite the same. It is a pioneer, a model, and a source of inspiration for the important work we do in teaching and engaging in Catholic studies in our own parts of the world. I'd also like to add one more shout out to our people this has been such an amazing day. I've been so inspired by all of the talks that you have given and that I've been able to go to. We put on conferences all the time. This is a fantastic conference. So once again, thank you to our directors, Darren and David, and thank you to Madonna and Shane for doing such a wonderful job and being so welcoming. So today, I'm very privileged to be able to speak on a subject that's very near and dear to my own heart and to yours, I hope, the Catholic imagination. The Catholic imagination takes many forms. This beautiful church that lies at the beating heart of this campus, the statues, the paintings, the stained glass windows that are inside of it, the hymns that we sing at Mass. All of these works of art serve the purpose of arresting us out of our ordinary lives through beauty, calling attention to the divine spark that lies at the heart of creation, and raising our minds from things visible and temporal to things that are invisible and eternal. In his brilliant letter to artists written in 1999, Pope John Paul II writes this: "Beauty is a key to the mystery and a call to transcendence. It is an invitation to savor life and to dream of the future. Beauty is the vocation of the artist and the instantiation of goodness in the world." This instinctive love of beauty comes to us through the power of the human imagination, a power that is exercised by artists of every stamp and those who practice in every genre. As poet Denise Levertov once wrote in her essay, A Poet's View, to be an artist is to live with the door of one's life open to the transcendent and to the numinous. She goes on to say in that essay, to reference in that essay, Welsh poet and sculptor David Jones, who we were just talking about at our table, who stated that the artist's life is one of obedience to a vocation, and that vocation is to, quote, gratuitously set up altars to the unknown God. Both of these writers were mystics of a sort, and both also were converts to Catholicism eventually. Both were from the UK. But before they turned to their adoptive faith, they were first acolytes of mystery, knowing that their reason for being in the world was to perceive, to penetrate, and to celebrate the sacred mystery that lies at the heart of all things, all people, all places, and at all times through their art. Levertov and Jones, of course, are far from alone in possessing and writing about this sacramental imagination. And I hope some of the names I'm about to mention are familiar to you. I'm sure they are in this room. In his wonderfully imaginative study, The Catholic Imagination, sociologist and priest and novelist Andrew Greeley writes of the enchanted world that Catholics occupy. Quote, "As Catholics, we find our houses and our world haunted by a sense that the objects, the events, and the persons of daily life are revelations of grace." As theologian David Tracy writes in his seminal study, The Analogical Imagination, Catholics accentuate the immanence of God in creation, as opposed to the Protestant dialectical view which emphasizes God's seeming absence. Tracy argues that Catholics sense the divine presence in the workaday world if and when we see through the eyes of the imagination. And yet another great Catholic theologian, philosopher, who also happens to be a Jesuit and also happened to have taught at Fordham University for a number of years, William Lynch, demonstrates in his powerful study, Christ and Apollo, that God inheres in the particular, in the definite, in the object, the person, the place, both those identified as sacred and those that are supposedly profane. Each and all are living instances of the incarnation. In my remarks today, I'd like to focus on the work of a few artists that share in this vocation of the imagination, who occupy for me a special place in the communion of saints as devotees of mystery and beauty. The connection, by the way, between saints and poets is a long and hallowed one, and I'm not saying this just because I'm a poet, by the way. This is something that has been said for a long time. In ancient tribes, poets had the power to curse or to bless. They were conduits of the supernatural and the holy. The prophets of old were poets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And they were also a little bit crazy, like saints. Contemporary poet Anne Sexton acknowledges this latter element. She says, "Saints have no moderation, nor do poets, just exuberance. Poets are passionate about their work. They can't not do it. The same can be said of saints." So tonight I'd like to take my cue from a saint who I have developed a great affection for over the last 40 years as a result of teaching at Jesuit universities, St. Ignatius of Loyola. There are many reasons, of course, to admire St. Ignatius, and most of us probably know his story, just checking to see how many of us know St. Ignatius' story. Okay, good, but a lot of us don't, so I'm just going to tell a little bit about St. Ignatius. First, he was a man who suffered an almost mortal wound at the Battle of Pamplona, and it triggered a midlife crisis. Like Dante's pilgrim in the Divine Comedy 200 years earlier, Ignatius had lost his way, found himself in a dark wood, knew that the life of vanity and indulgence that he had been living was unsustainable and unfulfilling. He was a soldier, he was a courtier, he was a ladies' man. This was not going to get him into heaven. He needed a conversion to set him on the right path. So as a devotee of books and the written word, it has always struck me as poignant that Ignatius's conversion came about through books, the Gospels and the narratives of the lives of the saints, the stories that Ignatius read during his convalescence at Loyola Castle in his native Basque region of Spain. And these stories set his mind and his heart on fire. Through the power of the word and the word, an exercise of his imagination, he was able to conceive for himself a new life, one dedicated to the greater glory of God. Most of us know what happened next. Once his shattered leg healed, although it healed and then he had them break it again because it didn't look good. And so then the second time it healed. This tells you something about his vanity. That was during the era when men wore tights, so the shape of your leg mattered. Now, not so much, right? But once his shattered leg did heal, he set out on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But he stopped along the way during a visit to Manresa. He took up residence in a cave for 11 months, and he wrote one of the most remarkable documents a saint has ever written, the Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius. Using his acute imaginative powers, St. Ignatius created a practical and a deeply personal approach to prayer, one which encouraged the praying person to imagine him or herself in the spaces and places occupied by Jesus. So we are invited to imagine the Annunciation, the Visitation, the Nativity, to imagine Jesus as a child with the elders in the temple, to imagine Jesus calling to his disciples, performing miracles, raising Lazarus, and riding triumphantly into Jerusalem, to imagine Jesus eating at the Last Supper and walking the grim road to Calvary, and then finally to accompany Jesus during his last moments on the cross. And Ignatius invites us not to just be listeners and readers of these gospel stories. He invites us to be co-creators as we reimagine the life of Christ and what those events might mean for us. When I learned about these spiritual exercises, I knew Ignatius was not only a saint, he was a poetic genius, because this is exactly how we poets think. The very unreligious poet Ted Hughes once referred to the exercises as gymnastics for the imagination. We immerse ourselves in the events of the past. We imagine ourselves into the lives of people and places outside of ourselves to get beyond our limited experience and try to understand the human condition. Some of those spaces are geographical, but they are also spaces in the heart, in the mind, and in the soul. About 25 years ago, I was fortunate to be able to engage in the exercises in what Ignatius calls the 19th annotation, which is for busy people. So instead of going away for 30 days on a retreat, you get to bring the spiritual exercises into your daily life. I learned not only a new way to pray, but a fresh way to encounter the world. St. Ignatius's famous declaration, "God is in all things," insists that all things are of God, all people, all places. In the context of the exercises, the Imago Dei becomes very real and very concrete. To believe this requires a leap of the imagination, and it is here, I think, that engagement of the Ignatian imagination empowers us to do the work that we do, whether it be teaching, or scholarship, or family life, or service, or in my case, writing poems. In the first week of the exercises, Ignatius invites us to come to terms with the fact that while the world is beautiful, it is also a place of brokenness and suffering. Flannery O'Connor, you knew that I was not going to end this talk without mentioning Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor, another one of our literary saints, once wrote that the artist must live his or her life, quote, hotly in pursuit of the real. Imagination is not an escape from a reality. It is a plunge into it, and it is very shocking. And so we must deal with the reality that the world is on fire, quite literally, as in the case of California a few weeks ago, as well as metaphorically. On the macrocosmic level, we know that the polar ice caps are melting, and that we have lived through the hottest summers in the past several years since modern record-keeping began. I was in Alaska a couple of weeks ago, and my host lamented the fact that none of the glaciers that he took me to see were frozen. We see every day that the wars in Ukraine and Gaza continue unabated. The list of human atrocities goes on and on. We know that the immigration and humanitarian crisis at our borders continues, as it does around the world. People capsize in overcrowded lifeboats, mothers and children drown, and we are still emerging from the trauma of a pandemic that killed millions of people. The world is a wreck. Given this, it is almost inevitable that we wonder, where is God in all of this? So for a moment, I'd like to take a brief detour from St. Ignatius to introduce an idea from Jewish tradition that resonates with our patron saint's understanding of the world, the concept, which I'm sure is familiar to many of you, of tikkun olam, the Hebrew term which translates to repair the world. Jewish wisdom holds that it is our role as human beings on this blessed earth to try to mend the broken world. This concept is present in much of Pope Francis's thinking, that prophetic Jesuit of our own time, particularly in Laudato Si', which I know many people in the room have read. It also resonates with the Ignatian call for justice for the mistreated members of our society and for solidarity with the underserved. The Ignatian concept of standing with and for others is one of many possible ways to enact tikkun olam. And it is precisely in those who stand with and for others, as well as those so-called others, that we find God. To see God in the poor requires imagination. To see God in the world requires imagination. To see God at all requires imagination, since none of us were fortunate to be alive during the time of Christ, and even many of those who did see him lacked the imagination to understand who he was. The imagination is a gift, a way of seeing that synthesizes the work of the head and the heart, the intellect and intuition, and that is superior to and beyond both. To paraphrase the great African-American Catholic writer Toni Morrison, who is up there in the corner, the only grace we can have is the grace that we can imagine. To make a better world, to become a better human being, we have to imagine it first, or it can't happen. And the more often we use this gift of imagination, the more powerful it becomes. This is precisely what poets and artists do. They use their imagination to enable us to see aspects of the world that might otherwise escape our notice. Artists point out the beauty that lies beneath seemingly unbeautiful surfaces and the meaning that resides within the ordinary and the mundane. Today, or this evening, I should say, for the remainder of our time together, I'd like to invite you on a journey, a poetic pilgrimage to holy lands, not just the Holy Land, but also the Holy Land that lies all around us and also lies within us. And first, I want to introduce a second patron saint for our conversation today, Saint Vincent van Gogh. Ignatius and Vincent are twin visionaries. Both saw God lurking in the things of this world, and they spent their lives celebrating the beauty and the power of that divine presence. Both knew that the world is charged with the grandeur of God, as Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins once wrote, despite appearances, and they sought to share that good news with others. So the first Holy Land we'll visit is Van Gogh country. I went to see an exhibition of Van Gogh's paintings in New York a number of years ago, and there were about 80 paintings in this small museum, the New Gallery, not very far actually from the Met, and it was overwhelming. And those of you who have been to the Van Gogh Museum of Amsterdam know this, or have seen any Van Gogh exhibitions. It's like having conversations with an angel. His way of looking at the world is nothing like our way of looking at the world. Seeing Van Gogh's paintings made me want to respond to them in some kind of way. This is what happens with artists and poets. There's a spark, there's something, and you know you need to respond. So I knew I needed to write about this, and this is the poem that resulted. The poem, by the way, is a sonnet. Many of my poems are. And one of the reasons I like to write in form, and most poets who do like to write in form, there is a sense in which the very fact that these are written in form show that there is a providential design to the universe. Poems don't just happen, they don't just occur. They are carefully crafted, they are made objects, just like a statue by Michelangelo is a carefully made object. Yes, inspiration is the source, but the craftsmanship is what makes it into a poem. I also love sonnets because they have, remember your literature class, 14 lines. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that's the same number of stations in the Stations of the Cross. So I think of the sonnet as like a journey, and each of the lines is like a station. And you're different when you get to the end of a sonnet than you were when you first started out, whether you're writing it or whether you're reading it. So I'll read this poem, Saint Vincent, which I probably should get out before I read it. And it is another galvanizing point for me was in one of his letters to his brother Theo, which are very moving. Vincent writes about his practice of art, and he says, "The best way to know God is to love many things." What Vincent loved of sky, he told the crows. He taught them blue and the long note of want, the rut and whirl of time that comes and goes, God's face in the field, drawn and gaunt. What Vincent loved of earth, he told the trees. Their branches writhed like flames when they heard how every leaf and bole at last is seized and falls like olive stones and evening birds. What Vincent loved of salt, he told the sea. The play and savor of the friends of Christ, their sails taut, each mast a wood-crossed T. the empty boats afloat on waves of light. What Vincent loved of fire, he told the fire, then placed his wounded hand upon the pyre. And that last line I steal from St. Francis's life, because some of you may remember that St. Francis tried to befriend Brother Fire, and of course he got burned as a result of it. And I think there's a lot of St. Francis in Van Gogh in many ways, trying to love the world. This very famous painting, The Wheat Field with Crows, it's obvious when we look at this painting that this is a natural world that is informed by a divine spirit in all of these things. God is in the crows, in the wheat, in the trees, in the clouds, and even in that dramatic sky. They are all alive and on fire with holiness. After looking at the world through Van Gogh's eyes, entering into his imaginative vision, we can never see this world the same way again. This is the imagination at work. The vision offered to us is transformative. It enables us to love the world, and yes, maybe especially a broken world. My own vision as a poet participates in this tradition. This book, which was published in 2022, attempts to explore a variety of holy lands. Some of the poems are set in the Holy Land, but one of the things that occurred to me when I was in the Holy Land, I was very fortunate to go there in 2019 on a pilgrimage just before the pandemic hit. It occurred to me that this is, of course, ground zero in many ways for our faith, but it is also gave me a sense of the holiness that is in many, many places in the world, and I wanted to explore those. In fact, I took as my cue for this book 2 epigraphs. The first one is from the book of Exodus, and this is the scene, and you can see that it's illustrated there on the right, when Moses is standing in front of the burning bush. And he is told by the voice of God, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." So this sense in which there's this one space that's holy and you are in it. And then contrasting to that is Chief Black Elk, who many of you know is on the road to canonization, a Catholic convert, says the Holy Land is everywhere. And so he brings his Native American sensibility as well as his Catholic sensibility to understand this idea of Ignatius that God is in all things. So the book is really about this kind of tension between these two ways of looking at holiness. And the holy lands that are explored go from Gotham to Golgotha, the Hudson River to the Jordan River, the Bronx to Galilee, and every place in between. Holy people live in all of those places. So I'll read a couple of poems from this collection. The first poems are called Christ Sightings. One of the things that happened to me as I was going through the Holy Land is I kept on seeing Jesus everywhere I went. Here were these places, storied places that I had heard about since I was a small child, and there I was in them. And so there was this very fascinating sense of Christ's presence being in those places. And I wanted to try to capture that in some kind of way, in the same way that you might try to capture it with a photograph. So this first poem is called The Storm Chaser, and it's set at the Mount of the Beatitudes, which is supposedly where Jesus spoke the Beatitudes to his followers, and there's the Sea of Galilee there, which is beautiful, much smaller than I thought it was going to be, but very, very beautiful. So this is a photograph that I took. I go running every morning, and I like to run by bodies of water, so I found myself in the unlikely situation of running along the Sea of Galilee, and it was at that moment that I began to have this sense of Christ's presence. So this is called The Storm Chaser, the Mount of Beatitudes, October the 16th, 2019, 7 a.m. Running along the Sea of Galilee, I see you in your boat, tall brown man that you are, standing in the prow, arms raised in supplication to the skies, wind-whipped tunic blowing wild and high as the waves that have paralyzed your friends who have hit the deck and now lie prone on the sodden wood, dumb as stone and waiting for what surely is the end. So low in the boat, I can't even see them. You alone are all might, pure motion, in the shape of a God. This small ocean, no match for your infinite love, for them, for the sky, for the sea, and yes, even for me. Another extraordinary place that we visited, maybe some people have been there, is the town of Magdala, which is actually an archaeological dig right now. It's where Mary Magdalene supposedly came from. And on the shore of the Sea of Galilee in this town, they've built this beautiful church. It is a church that is dedicated to holy women. And so when you go through the church, there are all of these wonderful depictions of Jesus with women in the stories that we know from the Gospels. And they're all striking, they're all beautiful, but the one that I found most striking is in the basement level, the Encounter Chapel, which is a very small chapel, and one whole wall is taken up with just this painting. And most of us, I think, will recognize this as the moment from the Gospel of Mark, where the woman who is suffering from the 12 years flow of blood approaches Jesus, touches his garment, and is instantly healed. So I was very struck and very moved by that electric moment in the middle, that woman's hand in the midst of all of those men's feet, her boldness. And so this poem is the result. It's called The Thief. And the epigraph comes from Mark. Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" When she touched him, she stole his fire. Woman Prometheus, who wouldn't take no for an answer. She was bold and full of blood, despised creature who crept along the edges of the swollen crowd. When she spied gold, bore her broken body to the sun center of the Lord's pulsing love. Call it a miracle it took two to make. Call it a reverse Midas moment, but tell it true and tell it blunt. Her sudden bout of faith, her long torment, her taking what her old God would not give. Long after his dying, she would live. This opportunity to re-see and to reimagine stories that are familiar to us so that they become fresh and new. Again, this is the Ignatian imagination. This woman with the flow of blood is considered an outsider, of course, right? Women who are menstruating are not even supposed to be in the presence of men, let alone touch them, let alone touch the hem of the Son of God. But as the other, she also knows that this is a new dispensation and this God will give her what it is that she wants. She is the one who is able to imagine the grace that she needs and is able to get it. So we get to see through her eyes in this poem. And one more from this group. When I was standing at the top of the Mount of Olives, I was struck by, this is the place where the Pharisees brought the woman who was taken in adultery. And that is a story, of course, that is very familiar to us, and it's usually seen from the position of an outside narrator as to what's happening. And I thought, what was her perspective on this as she was being taken by these men and being threatened, her life obviously being threatened. And so the result was this poem. Again, it's a sonnet. And the epigraph is, "And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. I know this much. She didn't speak. Women are never believed when they do. She stood up to be judged, didn't seek mercy from those men. She knew they'd kill her, do what they wanted to do, or not. Depending upon one man they wanted to snare in their net webbed of woven and half-true lies. Deciding who lives and who dies, blood sport to them, but not to him. He bent down and wrote in the sand their names, and beside them each one's sins, each daily failing, each man's debt. One by one, the sinners left." And of course, we have no idea what Jesus wrote in the dirt, but this poem posits one possible explanation, but there can be many poems about it and many explanations. Another place that I visited was Lazarus's tomb. Has anybody been to Lazarus' tomb? It's quite tiny. I was very struck by that. And it's very deep underground. And it's a place that's very, very claustrophobic. And again, this comes from an Ignatian meditation. I was moved to think, well, what was it like for Lazarus to wake up here? First of all, to wake up at all, but also to wake up in this particular place. So I've written several poems about Lazarus. The one I'm going to read is called Saint Lazarus. We don't usually talk about Lazarus as a saint, but I think he should be a saint. You know, he died, he came back to life, he died again, and he's a really good sport about all of this. I don't know what else you need to be a saint. So this poem is called Saint Lazarus, and it is a 16-line sonnet because I needed 2 extra lines. He knit himself up a cable stitch of skin, pushed his left eye in its socket and then his right, cracked the knuckles in his fingers, now so thin, raised himself from the dirt and stood upright. Lazarus, Lazarus, don't get dizzy. Lazarus, Lazarus, now get busy. Mary's weeping, Martha's made a cake. Jesus is calling at the graveyard gate. Your closest cousin, happy you are dead, eyes Martha's sheep and Mary's empty bed. The chorus of voices sings him awake. Once a body's broken, it cannot break. He licks his lips and wags his muscled tongue, flexes each foot till the warm blood comes, turns from the darkness and moves toward the sun, a step, a shamble, a dead outrun. Ignatius's vision, God in all things, challenges us. It's easy to see God in beautiful places, Van Gogh landscapes, the Sea of Galilee, but what about the unbeautiful ones? Is there any place that we don't find God? Poets and saints both assure us that God is also in those spaces where he may not be seen, spaces that are abandoned, that seem bereft of holiness. These are places of desolation, a word that Ignatius uses to describe spiritual spaces in which God may be absent. He speaks about the 2 poles of the spiritual life when you're doing the exercises, whether you're in a state of consolation, when God is near, or desolation, when God seems far from you. It is necessary, however, in Ignatius's vision and in a Catholic vision, to look into the darkness in order to see the light. So I'd like to read a couple of poems that are part of a series of poems that I wrote in the summer of 2018 during the border crisis at the Texas-Mexico border. They're called border songs. As many of us in this room will recall, for several months, the news was dominated daily by stories and images of migrants who were horribly suffering. Families were being separated, children were put in cages, people were housed in unsanitary conditions, and people were being sent back to places of great danger. There was little any of us could do except to watch helplessly. What the Ignatian imagination asks us, encourages us to do, is to bear witness to the suffering of our brothers and sisters in some way, to make sure that they are seen, and to acknowledge our common belonging to God. My way of doing that was to do what poets do. I wrote poems of accompaniment in which I tried to imagine myself into the lives of the people at the border and to invite the reader to imagine him or herself there. The border songs are what Nobel Prize-winning poet Czeslaw Milosz calls a poetry of witness, and they constitute one form that Tikkun Olam might take. Poets cannot enact legislation, we can't order armies, we can't rescue people from disaster, but we can try to repair the world through the word, one small syllable at a time. I'll also mention that these poems are written in a very unusual form. It's called a triolet. There are 8 lines, and the first line and the 5th line and the last line are repeated. So it's a form that one can use only when you're trying to create a sort of incantatory effect, a haunting effect. And so I felt the triolet was much more useful in these poems than a sonnet would be. So I'm just going to read a couple of these. There are 15 of them, and I'm not going to read all 15. I'll just read a couple. So the first one is border song number 1. Say, stolen child, the world from which you've come. You can't go back, although you know you must. Your father grieves, your mother is undone. Say, stolen child, the world from which you've come. You, their only daughter, you, their only son. All their dreams are now turned to dust. Say, stolen child, the world from which you've come. You can't go back, although you know you must. Some of you may remember this photograph that was in the New Yorker. It was taken by a janitor who was working in one of these border places. And these are the rosaries that were taken away from all of the people who came across the border, because of course they take everything and they take your rosary. This was really the origin of the border songs when I saw this photograph. I found it so moving. Border song number 2. They confiscate your rosary when you come. I cannot go to sleep without one, thumbing each bead until the night is done. They confiscate your rosary when you come. There's nowhere to hide it. There's nowhere to run. It was my dead mother's. Now I have none. They confiscate your rosary when you come. I cannot go to sleep without one. And then I'll read the last one. Some of you may remember a photograph that haunted us all, I think, of a father who was drowned with his little daughter. She was 2 years old, and in order to keep her safe, he had taken his T-shirt and put her inside of it to keep them together, but they drowned in the Rio Grande River and their bodies washed up with them bound to each other. I don't have the heart to use that photograph, so this is a photograph of them in happier times. Border song number 15. Face down in the river lies a father. Beside him lies his little daughter. The saddest death is death by water. He held her when the current caught her. He did not leave, he did not falter. Face down in the river lies a father, his arms around his little daughter. Poetry opens up our minds and hearts, and it does this in carefully ordered language, language that is metrical, language that rhymes, language that sings. Even in expressing sorrowful truths, there is beauty and order in the song. Think of the aria in an opera, where usually murder has taken place. Think of Michelangelo's Pietà, a mother holding her dead son. Your favorite song about lost love. The beauty of these expressions makes our human suffering bearable. The creation of art is a stay against destruction. Order is a stay against chaos. Thus, poetry asserts that there is beauty, there is love, there is providential order, and there is meaning in the universe by its very form. So in closing, I'd like to return to my previous theme, which has really been present as a through line in my remarks this evening, this theme of desolation. We must acknowledge that the world is broken, but as human beings and as creatures of the imagination, as people of God, we have to love it anyway. So I'll finish with one final poem inspired by that great Catholic saint, Flannery O'Connor. I'll actually put Flannery up there. There she is. One of my most fun projects was, I've been teaching Flannery for 40 years, and so she has been inside my head for a very long time. And I decided I needed to get her out of there. So one day I thought, I'm gonna write a poem in Flannery's voice, and I did, and it was so enjoyable. First of all, it freed me from myself, but it also was nice to try to be her for a little while. So then the next day I wrote another one, and then the next day I wrote another one, and before I knew it, I had 101 sonnets that are in Flannery O'Connor's voice. So this collection, Andalusian Hours, are these poems which are about Flannery's childhood, Flannery suffering from her lupus, Flannery writing, Flannery being Flannery, and as we all know, she says the darndest things. So it was a really enjoyable, again, exercise of the imagination. And this particular poem, every poem uses an epigraph from Flannery's writing, and this comes from one of her letters, and I love this epigraph because it's so Flannery and so Catholic. She says, if you believe in the divinity of Christ, you have to cherish the world at the same time that you struggle to endure it. Not just love, but cherish it, this world, from the Latin caris to the French cher, meaning dear, meaning costly, beloved, meaning hold to your heart and handle with care. This world, from Old English, where old, meaning human race, meaning age of man. This world, meaning our earth and her heirs, meaning all of us here now, if you can. The serial killer, the crooked cop, the war-worn refugee at the door, the racist, the rapist, the shooter and shot, the filthy rich, and the dirty poor. This world, ever ancient and ever new, not just love it, but act like you do. Flannery O'Connor, Denise Levertov, go back to my people, our people. Where are they? There they are. Flannery O'Connor, Denise Levertov, David Jones, Vincent van Gogh, Chief Black Elk, Toni Morrison, and St. Ignatius, all are saints who remind us that God is indeed in all things, if we only have imagination enough to perceive that presence. Let me close with the words of Pope Francis, who you see pictured with some odd woman shaking his hand there. In a very pastoral address he created and then delivered to me, along with 40 other writers, who happened to be at a conference on the Catholic imagination in Rome in 2023, Pope Francis encouraged us in the work that we are doing. And after this, he met with each of us, gave us a rosary and a blessing, and he actually seemed to enjoy it. The Pope was a total fanboy that day because one of the writers that was there was Martin Scorsese, and he was just obviously thrilled to have Martin Scorsese there. So we refer to that day as the day we met the two popes. But it was really a lovely meeting, and you could see that he was in very fine spirits. But in any case, these were among his final words to us, words in which he posits Christ as the ultimate poet. He says, "This, then, is the challenge facing the Catholic imagination in our time. It is a challenge entrusted to you, not to explain the mystery of Christ, which is ultimately unfathomable, but to enable us to touch him, to feel his closeness, to let us see him as alive, and open our eyes to the beauty of his promises, because his promises appeal to our imagination. They help us to imagine in a new way our lives, our history, and the future of humanity." Thank you.